This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first, like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Ampire. Hey babies, hey babies, hey babies. Hi everyone. 2 days away, Callow. 2 days away from what could be, in my opinion, would be maybe the biggest upset in playoff history that the Commanders have pulled off if they do it, right? Could be.
Yeah, because I mean, their success is usually when they're a very good regular season team. They were good, not like great this season, like historically great in terms of like 91 Super Bowl expectations. I don't want to say because they do have stats that back that up, but yes, I would absolutely say this. I started to break this down on my show. I don't know if you've done this. Can you name me the elite quarterbacks that the Lions have played this year? Did you look at that?
No. So they got what? Darnold twice. Love was hurting up and down all year. Caleb obviously had his rookie season.
Yep.
They played Stafford, right? Beat him.
That was
week
one, though. That was week one. Week one, Stafford. Week two,
Baker lost to him.
Week two.
Right. Do you count Purdy? I don't know. And that was also very late in the season. I don't know if you count that one.
I said elite.
I'd have to go. Let me see. I got their schedule in front of me. Let's take a look.
I said elite, not very good. Elite.
Okay. I don't know if you count Dak in that, but Dak, yeah, and Josh Allen. They lost to Josh Allen.
So that's the one.
That's the one. That's true. That's true. I mean, they played all these teams early. Rams, Buccaneers were early. Kyler, Geno, Dak, Darnold, I guess Levis, Love, CJ Stroud. They beat them. They actually did. That was the game that there was like with us. They had 5 turnovers in that game and won anyway.
Correct.
Right? And that's what I was kind of like, Houston, you guys stink. Like, how in the world do you lose that one? But we had one of those too. We beat a good team, playoff team doing something like that. Jaguars, no. Colts, no. Bears, no. Packers. Love was a disappointment, I think, this year. A lot of injuries. Then they got Josh Allen lost. And then what? Bears, Niners, Vikings. Yeah, you're right.
So we would have played this game.
Anything like this. I agree.
Bears fans wanted to play this game with us, 7 weeks into the season.
Yeah.
And
I'm not in. They were in irrational talking mode. And like the whole time we're sitting there going, you guys are just upset because you see how good our guy is. And it's like upsetting you.
Correct.
And the whole time I'm sitting there going, one, because I'm rooting for Caleb. He's local. Then I'm like, like, I think he's going to be fine. I think you guys had a bad setup. We knew this in the spring. Like, you guys have a bad setup, and here it is. Like, you better get this hiring right, because if you don't, you're going to screw this guy's career up, or he's going to go somewhere else. Like, we've lived every bad scenario you could have. We've lived it. So, like, we know what it looks like when it's off. And so I think he'll end up being good, but they were irrational. He wasn't even playing that well. They were so irrational about it. They were just trying to convince themselves that they made the right choice. And now they're probably sitting there going, they didn't, even though I don't believe that. Like, I believe that all 3 of these top 3 quarterbacks are going to end up being good. I think they're all going to end up being good. I think Nick's has turned out to be in the right place with the right coach and is going to be good. How good? I don't know. Good. McCarthy's obviously, who knows? But like, this quarterback class is looking like it may go down as really, really, really good if the Bears fans don't lose their mind. But back to your other point, which is you're suggesting the Lions haven't seen anything like this yet.
I mean, I'm not saying Josh Allen isn't that. Like, Josh Allen is the MVP candidate of the year, could win MVP, should probably win MVP.
And they lost to him and gave up 42 points to him.
At home. Not in Buffalo, because there's a difference there. They did it at home. And so I'm just saying, everyone wants to play this game with our team, with the Commanders, saying they got lucky at the last second. They didn't play people. Like, it was more the first half of the season. People were going, oh, they haven't played anybody. And granted, their schedule looks better now. Also, go look at some of the scores of those games. They skirted by Arizona. Remember, the Bears had a chance to win that game on Thanksgiving. That game against Green Bay was very close the following Thursday. I'm just saying.
Yeah, the Bears should have won the Thanksgiving game. That was the one where they had to fire Eberflus because the time management was so utterly stupid that it made no sense to anybody, and everybody on earth saw it.
That's right. He got fired the next day. And granted, I get it. We beat him on a Hail Mary. But everyone wants to play this game and nitpick our schedule. Well, I decided to do it yesterday. And you know what? I'm impressed by the record. Don't get me wrong. It's very impressive. And they broke Darnold. And I'm giving them all the credit in the world. But why are they not being nitpicked as much as we are when it comes to schedule, quarterbacks played, and all of that? And look at some of the scores of those games. And granted, they blow out teams like they're supposed to, just like we did. But I'm just saying, credit where credit is due sometimes, or not credit where credit isn't supposed to be due sometimes. I think people should be talking about that a little bit more, because Jaden is different than anyone they played besides Allen.
Let's see. After they beat the Colts 24-6 and beat the Jaguars 52-6.
Yes. As I said, supposed to do.
That was Thanksgiving, and they barely won and shouldn't have. Or at least it should have gotten to overtime. It's just stupid that the Bears didn't at least get them to overtime just because of the way they handled the game. Remember, they just didn't call a timeout and the clock ran out. It was like one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life.
And us too. Like we get that too. Like we got the Bears on a weird win too. So
let's see. Then they beat the Packers at home 34-31. But I mean, I think the Packers season was very much alive for them. And I still think the Packers, they're a playoff team. They were a very good team.
And you got to remember, that was the best Thursday night game because they both played on Thursday for Thanksgiving. So that was like a normal game too. That was the best Thursday game of the year. That was close.
Then they got the Bills and lost 48-42. I have a funny feeling that this one Saturday night could feel a little bit like that. I don't really like our chances getting into something like that, but who knows? Then they beat the Bears handily. Then they went to the 49ers. Their season was over. They'd already been eliminated.
Yes.
And they gave up 34, and the Niners could have easily won.
Right.
Which is very telling about where Detroit's defense is right now. And then the recency bias of it, which is why I think I'm freaked and everybody should be freaked, is one, their record, two, their offense scores prolifically, like historically prolifically, three, their speed, which I'll get into in a minute, and four, the last game they played was a de facto playoff game, and they killed those dudes.
Sure.
Well, actually, they killed Darnold.
Yes. Right. Exactly.
That game was 10-9 in the third quarter.
Yep.
It was 10-9. It wasn't like they were running that team off the field. They weren't. Darnold in the red zone was horrific. Like, missed a million. I just watched this game again last night. He missed a lot of throws. I'm not saying they would have won, but they broke him. I don't know what they did to him, but they broke him. They didn't break that team. They broke him, which carried over, and that's why they're out of the playoffs. He was terrible in that game against the Rams the other day. Anyway, I'll hear you on that. I'm looking for any kind of hope and hype too. Like, the reality here is this too. Like, this is what they can't get away from. They've given up a ton of points since they've had all these injuries. Like, if they didn't lose the amount of people that they've lost on defense, I would basically call them unbeatable with the offense that they're putting out there. But because they're working with backups specifically across the front, because they're missing so many people, they're giving up a ton of points. Like, week 14 through 17 allowed 428 yards a game, 32 points a game. Week 18 was different with Darnold, but we just talked about what happened. They got in the red zone a million times, and he was terrible. Like, they should have scored more points than they did. They didn't have a problem actually moving the ball. They got stunted when they got in the red zone. But the 3 weeks before, 428 yards, 32 points per game. Good luck holding us to 9. Like, nobody's done that to us this year.
Right.
Good luck. So that's like, I agree. There's like hope here. It's not like you're beating an unbeatable team. This isn't the Chiefs because they haven't been them yet.
That's right. Like, and that's what I'm getting at here too. And I'm not trying to put like all of my stock into this because we literally lived this year, right? Where we had every week the opposing team would write us off because of all the reasons we're listing. But I will say you're a fool if you think that they're this perfect number one seed that has, played a bunch of really good opponents and played elite quarterbacks and been perfect. They haven't been. And I'm just saying there's a pathway here. There is a
100%.
full-fledged pathway here for this team to win. I mean, that's what I'm getting at here. I'm not hopeless, is what I'm getting at.
Oh, I'm not hopeless at all. I've said this for a while. I put nothing past this team. Nothing. Okay. I do believe it would be an upset, but like I put nothing past them. And I've said this for a couple of weeks now. Underestimate them at your own risk. Yep. And if we get into a 1-score game with them in the fourth quarter and you give our guy the ball back, that place is going to get real tight, real fast, because we've just done it too many times. This guy is too cool, calm, collected. And frankly, your defense has to blitz to try to get pressure. Good luck with that against our guy. So I trust 5. It's funny when we were talking about this yesterday, and I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, this game is so meaningful in exactly what we're launching into, because there's a lot of me that feels like this is us looking at them in 2 years, with the exception of our quarterback is more Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson than Jared Goff. No offense to Jared Goff, who's amazing in this offense, but our guy can do things that he cannot do. And it's going to give us flexibility of a very different offense moving forward because of his athletic gifts and athletic ability. That's not Goff. He ain't running anywhere, right? He's not doing anything with his legs. But the whole cut from the same cloth idea resonates with me. Like, the head coach is defensive minded. The head coach is very just kind of rally the troops, set a tone, may or may not be doing the X's and O's, but kind of embodies what the program's about. And then everyone gets in line and follows them. They're extremely tough. They're extremely aggressive. They both live by these mottos of, we'll take you on anywhere. We don't care. It's about us. It ain't about you. You're going through us. You got to deal with us. All the same mottos, right? And I think our roster hopefully is going to look like theirs, at least offensively, in a year or two, when Adam Peters has a chance to get a couple more off seasons in him, where we're using the draft picks and the cap room and all that stuff, and we're getting more weapons on the field, and then all of a sudden it's going to look a little bit different. And then there's the other side of it, which is, because this quarterback is who it is, because Dan Quinn is not a first-time head coach and has won before and gotten to a Super Bowl before, there is a little of the Chiefs here going on. And this game embodies what trajectory they're really on. Because if they're going to be able to go up there and beat a 15-2 team who's off a bye on a short week in front of their crowd, where the get-in price is absurd because these people have been waiting their life to see this team go to the Super Bowl, well, we might not be talking about we're the Lions in 2 years. We might be talking about we're the Chiefs. Because that's where this thing is kind of heading, where we have a quarterback that elevates people differently. The Chiefs, once Tyreek Hill left, name the great receivers that are playing on that team. Right. Name the great running backs that are playing on that team. They're all very good players, no disrespect. But come on, that also isn't Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, just like we're talking about with our team. Who's your number 2? Who's their number 2? Tell me who their number 2 is. They don't have a problem scoring on people because the quarterback is so good and the coaching is so good that it overcomes some personnel deficiencies, because you can't have everybody. We're in this weird window. This guy that we have is extraordinary. And, we've got a window where we're not paying him a lot of money. That's going to change in a few years. I'm not sure which trajectory we're on. And I think if I were the Lions, I'd be a little scared about that in general, because if we can beat them now, is it ever going to be their time?
That's what I said in preseason. I said their biggest fear is that somehow this team gets into the playoffs and strikes the fear of God in them. And all of a sudden you're going to be dealing with this other quarterback on the NFC on top of everyone else, right? On top of Jalen Hurts and possibly, JJ McCarthy, if he ends up working out. That's their one. It's I'm not trying to kill Jared Goff here, but if you have Jared Goff versus an elite quarterback in crunch time, we all know who you're going to take, right? Yeah. So that's where their fear is coming in here. And to your point with the Chiefs too, they do have a Hall of Fame tight end. And this year that tight end has disappeared essentially. And they're still doing what they're doing.
They still have 2 losses.
Yeah. It's so ridiculous what they're doing with just him at quarterback. And I'm not saying no one else, but fine players around him. Not unlike what we're doing here.
I mean, it's so funny. Last year, I remember I said this story yesterday. My buddy said to me, he goes, He goes, y'all screwed up. He goes, this is the worst team we've had during this, quote unquote dynasty, which it is. And he's like, and so we're going to be better next year. He's right. Here they are this year. They're not nearly as dynamic on offense as typically they normally are. And they're still 15-2. Like, they don't even have to be the Death Star to win constantly. Here are the things, though, that at least stand out. I'll talk a lot more tomorrow about it, but in watching them, Detroit, like the problem that I think everybody has, and they're very well schemed. Their offensive line's very good. They've got a little Baltimore in them. I don't think people think of them that way, but if they get a lead, the field gets tilted and their offensive line takes over. And they've got two pure speed players on this team that I think separates them. Like, they're very well schemed. I think Goff is very good. Amon-Ra's terrific, but that outside receiver has a speed level that we're not accustomed to. Nobody really is, but we haven't played a lot of that this year. And Jahmyr Gibbs is really good. And I mean, inside the tackles, outside the tackles, he throttles up like a Porsche. And this is the problem with them. They are a big play waiting to happen constantly. And that's what's tough about them. And when you watch them, you just sit there and go if you actually go watch this Minnesota game, you'll see it was very close. The whole thing, they hung in there with them. And then the bottom dropped out. When they couldn't keep up scoring, all of a sudden, this was kind of like when we played the Eagles the first time around. Eventually, the dam broke. And Saquon popped off a couple of big runs, and then the game's just over. These guys have four people who can do it, and that's what's scary about them.
As someone that had Jamison Williams on his fantasy team all year, he's very Deshaun Jackson. There were some weeks where he did nothing, and then it was one reception for 90 yards and a touchdown. That's who he reminds me of, except he's a little bit better of an all-around player than Deshaun was. And yeah, not only that, they get both their running backs too. Both Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are going to be back here. That worries the hell out of me, because if they somehow even are getting to Goff somehow with this offensive line, those two running backs scare the crap out of me, because this team has had trouble, stopping the run. So yeah, it's honestly you don't know which way to look. That's what I look at when I look at their offense. You cannot focus on any one person because there are so many pieces on the field at the same time.
Yeah, they're very tough. Amon-Ra's very good. He's their Terry. He's very, very, very good. I agree. Montgomery coming back is a big deal. Gibbs is, God, everyone laughed at them when they made that pick. That dude is a top 3 running back in the NFL. He's different than Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley. I'm not even sure that I wouldn't put him in Saquon's class because of the explosiveness. Henry, if he gets going, you're in trouble because he's a monster truck. But this guy has got the McCaffrey pure speed. If he gets a little crease and goes, he can throttle up unlike very few players. Very good vision, very good player, tougher than I think people probably think he is. He took a hit in that Vikings game early that would have knocked a lot of guys out. Van Ginkel just laid him out on a poorly designed screen pass that was red. And he still scored 4 touchdowns in the game. So he's tough, right? So this guy really is a massive, massive difference maker. He is I think, of the class of these great running backs in the NFL. He's very difficult to deal with. The other one, too, that I think is really problematic for Washington is Laporta, because they've had problems with tight ends all year, and he's a high-end one. So this is a problem. That matchup is problematic for Washington. And I would expect that he has a really good game against them because of that matchup. But frankly, I would prefer him to have it than Gibbs or Williams. Amon-Ra is going to get his. He's like Terry. He's going to get his. You just hope he doesn't kill you on something big. Typically, he's not a deep threat. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen with him. The other two are home run hitters. This guy, if you want to go slowly down the field with him, I will live with if this guy has 10 catches for 98 yards, because I'd prefer that, knowing it's a bad matchup for us, than the 2 for 125 that Williams could have with a touchdown, because that's the type of high-end possibility that he has.
Now, as I just mentioned, you can't look everywhere, and this screams the guy that they're going to probably just have to let go a few times. Not let go, but that's going to get through busted coverage or whatever, that he's going to bust a few, but hopefully doesn't get the explosives on you. That's the hope essentially with this one. And to your point on like Amon-Ra, like he's going to get his, like, look at what Evans did. Evans had what, 90 yards, 89 yards, something like that. Like sometimes with some of these players, they're just going to get the yardage because they're that good. You look at Terry too. It was Terry and Brown, sorry, that both had 89 yards. I think Evans had 92 yards. But yeah, you're just going to have guys that are going to rack up their stats because they're that good.
I'm going to do this tomorrow because I don't have time to do it now, because John Keim's going to be up in a moment. But like, the numbers really don't tell the story on either side of either team. I'm going to go through it tomorrow. Like, they have what reads to be a very poor pass defense, and yet at the same time, the team's opposing completion percentage is among the worst in the NFL. So is their pass defense bad if the quarterbacks are completing, a low percentage of passes? No, it's not. It's the same thing with, I think Washington's pass defense is ranked number 3. I don't think anyone really believes that, like they give up more chunk plays than most teams. So like, this is a really interesting matchup. I do think that this is a test of wills. And in a lot of ways, we're going to find out who gets shook a little bit. And I really don't expect our team to, which I think is what's probably going to surprise. I think this is where some of this unfounded overconfidence from some of the voices that are coming out there. I think they think we're going to walk into this building and they're going to scare the crap out of everybody. And then if they give up some long touchdown, which could easily happen to any one of these players, well, we'll just fold. I don't think you've watched us play. Like, I'm not worried about us losing our composure or getting shook. I mean, we've been in too many close games, which is why let's see how you guys handle a high leverage close game, because you're the ones that typically do crazy things. And so are we in a situation where it's a 1-score game and you guys are going for a 4th and 7 at the 50?
Right.
Let's see.
Like,
right? Let's see.
There are two things here that I think are that if they play out, I really like our chances. It's one, you just mentioned the Vikings game. If it's 10-9 headed into the 4th quarter, we will take that all day. All day we will take that. And your crowd is going to, as we mentioned this yesterday, turn into Game 7 hockey. It's going to get real tight up in there because all of a sudden they're going to see what has been playing out for the last 5 weeks with this team. The other one was I loved Jaden Daniels on Tuesday when once again, they asked him about a hostile environment. And he was just like, nah, none of that bothers me. Like, in the most boring way possible, that there's no way to phase this dude. So everyone's saying, oh, you're walking into the literal lion's den. This guy hasn't been phased all year. So once again, the pathway is sitting right in front of him. You better not let it happen.
I agree. All right, take a quick break. Bram wants to show ESPN 630, the Sports Capital.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Time for our weekly visit with John Keim of ESPN, the John Keim Report. Washington wins its first playoff game in 19 years. So, boy, it's been a while, John. You've been covering this team a long time. This is pretty wild that this has continued into this weekend.
Bram, I was a kid back then. Well, kind of. Kid reporter, maybe. I'd like to think that. It's been... I don't even know how to put it into words anymore. This is, as a reporter, it's been the most fun season by far that I've ever covered. But it's so much because of what goes into this year and what preceded this year, the decades, and especially the last 5 years that preceded this year. Like what, and then to see a fan base reinvigorated, to see a quarterback in Jaden Daniels do what he does, and to be around this team, Bram, like, again, we've talked about this, but like in the spring and summer, you could feel a difference around them, the energy in the building. And it's like, oh, well, it's a coaching change. There's always new energy, but it was always different. You just didn't know how it manifests itself. And now you see, and that's why they say that, we'll never see a season like this again. They may have better finishes to a year than whatever happens this year, maybe. But we won't have a season like this again where it's just where all the elements come into play and the football guys kind of get together and say, this fan base has suffered enough. Let's change that.
Yeah, I will say this, though, that it isn't over yet. And,
no, that's right. No, it's not.
And if they, I don't want to get ahead of it because it's 3 more wins against 3 incredible teams, no matter what you look at, however you look at it. And 2 of them, again, would be on the road if they actually did that. But if they did, it's not an exaggeration. This would be the greatest turnaround in professional sports that we would have witnessed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because it's again, so many things. Like, this is a franchise that went from one of the most unlikable just 2 years ago to arguably maybe one of the most popular. I mean, seriously, and just how the shape they were in at this time last year before Adam Peters was hired and then Dan Quinn and then drafting Jane Daniels, like, it was a mess. And you know, I think because they had the number 2 pick and you thought they'd get a good quarterback in this draft, they're like, okay, that was going to help. But I don't think anybody foresaw this at all. And I think this organization feels like it's playing with house money. I wouldn't put anything past what they can do.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, it's not just because they were 4-13 last year. It's because everything else that surrounded them in prior years. And it's the transformation from loser to winner overnight, from unlikable to lovable.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, this is again, like, I think for fans, like, they can wear their Commanders gear with pride for the first time ever, and so it's been remarkable. And you're right, like, we've talked about this on the podcast too. Like, people have to remember, this is the first chapter. This is not the end chapter for what is going on here. And like, I'm not putting anything past this group. Like, if they win or lose, or if they win Saturday, but I'm not going to be surprised.
No, I'm not either. No, I put nothing past them. They have the characteristics of a championship team. They play with poise. Yeah. They execute. They don't hurt themselves. Like, they'll have penalties in games, but they don't do the dumb stuff. They don't hurt themselves. They don't turn the ball over very much. They are in lockstep with one another. And while I don't, like, I'm be the first to tell you, like, I think the team they're playing this weekend has a better roster than them. And the team next week, if it is Philadelphia, if they were to get that far, has a better roster than them. And if they get to the Super Bowl, if it's definitively Baltimore or Buffalo, better roster, and probably Kansas City too. But they display characteristics that we haven't seen here in a team like this. And that's why I put literally nothing past them. And then there's number 5. And because of him, all of the whatever voids they have in a talent disparity can get masked over by someone who can do things that we haven't seen in this uniform in a long time or ever.
Yeah, for sure. And now they're going to be running up against a lot of teams that have their own, that feel they have their version of a number 5. But, and I mean, there aren't a lot of guys like that.
No.
So what I know is that guys like that do special things. I mean, that's, you watch guys like, LeBron or Michael and what they do, how they lift others around them. And that's what he does. But then it goes back to, again, the bond that this team has. And it's like, it's really hard to say, like, well, what play does that make a difference on? Well, I don't know that makes a difference on a play per se, as much as it is in a mindset. And Dan Quinn said it too, is like, there's a difference between, like, the guys, like, they get along, but they're not necessarily hanging out. Like, they're not necessarily playing for one another, but they, I like this guy, but they're not. But this group, it feels like they're playing for one another. And those Joe Gibbs teams always did that.
They did.
They felt like, and I think, so there are intangibles. And again, listen, Detroit's going to have intangibles. We know that. But this team has them too, and it's powerful. And the other thing I know too, even for Saturday, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but Detroit's defense has some holes, and they can't be excited about facing this quarterback in this offense.
No, and I want to read this because I think it's important just to say it. Because of injuries, more than anything, weeks 14 through 17, they allowed an average of 428 yards a game and 32 points a game. In week 18, They didn't against Minnesota, okay? And it was a really great performance, which was their last game.
Right.
But Sam Darnold was awful in the red zone. Otherwise, that score would have looked very, very different. And they still might have won because they've won anyway. But down the stretch, the injuries have hurt them. So anyone who sits there and tells me that this game's going to be a blowout, I don't see it. And I think partially it's because that Lions defense is not the group that they expected to have. And this team has gone up against good defenses and scored on them. So to think that they're going to like hold them to 13, 17, 20 points, they're not. So that's why I think that this game's on Saturday night for sure.
Listen, so there's a couple things. So I was watching the Lions offense the other day, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is a really, and we've watched it before, but when you're watching it, like the coaches film and all that, it's just different. And you see all the different things they do, how they can fool you, how hard it is to defend, et cetera. Well, I'm watching this against San Francisco. And then I look up in the upper left of my screen is the score. And it has like the down and distance scores, time, blah, blah, blah. Well, every time I looked up, Detroit was losing because the Niners could move on them quite easily. And I just started watching the other side of the ball, more in depth. And like, that's what you see, a lot of 9, 10, 11, 15, 16-yard pass play.
Yes.
And you're going to get that with this group. And, to the point, Bram, where like if Washington wins the toss, I'd take the ball first and try and just kind of get ahead of the pace here. You go into the fourth quarter and it's a close game, that people there are going to be puckered up knowing that what Jaden Daniels has done this year. And nobody, like I've asked people this week, like, when was the last time Jaden surprised you? And I think it's been a long time. I'm not sure he ever has, but like, it's just, there's nothing that would surprise you that he does in those situations because and the belief has filtered through to everybody else. Like Giambi Brown's going to make a big play in those moments because that's just what you do now. It's amazing.
It is.
Really is.
It is amazing. Their offense is terrific. Listen, they're like the fourth highest scoring team ever. Their point differential's like plus 220. I mean, they've lapped the field this year with this team. The real opening is their defense will give up yards and points, and I think that's why it will end up being close. And then, Jared Goff can't run like Jaden Daniels, so maybe you catch a mistake, maybe you get a nice rush on him, maybe you get a fumble, something like that, which you feel differently about with Daniels, and maybe you catch the break that I think that they're going to need. But
Correct.
To me, there are two things that are going to have to happen, and this is one of them, and this is why nobody can handle these guys this year. They have a really, really, really good offensive line, but on top of it, they have two true pure speed guys on that team, and I don't think this team has faced much of that in recent weeks.
No.
And I love Amon-Ra. I think he's terrific. But Williams is the killer because he's the one that can get the 60-yard touchdown pass. And then Gibbs as a running back in space is devastatingly fast.
Yep.
And this is where I think is the problem for everybody, and it's going to be the problem this weekend. Can this defense handle speed of that level? I'm just not sure.
And I'll tell you what, the other thing along with that speed is play design. And they do a good job attacking certain coverages by running Jameson Williams on like a deep crosser. But then the way they occupy the backside corner, who would be responsible, like it's a zone, would be responsible for maybe zone match, whatever it is, responsible for getting Williams after the catch. They do a good job of creating bad angles for that corner by play design on the other side, like in the way someone else running the route. So you create gaps for Williams. So it's not just that you have a good player, but they do a good job creating more space for them. With Gibbs, they create space for him by where they get him the ball, and that's dangerous. And with Williams too, like the other thing I just watched earlier today, all of his like pass plays for 30 yards or more. And just if you're a safety and you don't have depth, he's running past.
That's right.
I don't care. I mean, it's just, but they do a good job of trying to hold guys to give him that chance to get into the opening, because once he's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and like you said, like Gibbs too, and St. Brown is very, very good, a terrific receiver. But those are the two guys who are going to keep you up at night.
Yeah, and this is the other thing. Like, so many Commanders fans showed up in Tampa. That was incredible. I think they're going to have a contingent here, but this is a very hard building to get into. The secondary ticket prices are crazy for this game, like highest ever type of thing. That fan base is ready to roll. They're going to have to weather a storm, Washington. Like, there's no doubt in my mind they're going to have to weather a storm. But here's the other thing about them that I've loved about them. They've either been tied or, in most cases, the last 4 weeks trailed at halftime and come back anyway. Like, I don't think they'll get shook. If there was ever a place where it might happen, it would be Saturday. But I also trust that will not happen to this team.
I agree. I think it's funny because I did some Detroit stations. They're talking about, oh, isn't it going to, the atmosphere, like, what's it going to be like for them playing here? I'm like, I don't think you know this team. They don't know this team very well. If you think like that's going to rattle them. For where they've come from, they're not going to be intimidated by it. Now, the question is more of handling the crowd noise is more about operational stuff. It's not about intimidation stuff, and then it's also like if you let Detroit get ahead, you're going to have to then create some plays or two on defense to get back in it. If you get behind by double digits, like that's not the team you want to fall behind like that again. But, I don't think they will be rattled by the situation. That's why I'm like, I would take the ball first and get ahead of it if you can. It may backfire if you go 3 and out, but I would be surprised if you went 3 and out against that group.
Yeah.
But I would like, it's kind of like going for it on 4th down. I know the trend is to not take the ball first, but man, I would try and get some points and play from ahead.
I'll hear that one out, but if you go 3 and out and they score and they're getting the ball to start the second half, oh man!
I agree. And I'm not sure I would. I don't know that I would do it, but I would give a strong. I wouldn't automatically. If at this point in the week I'm not automatically deferring, just because. You have to me, you're going to have to be you're going to go for it on 4th down situation.
100%. Yeah.
So is it, can you get ahead of the curve here? Like you don't, unless, because the problem is you go out and let them score first. Now you're playing from behind, but I don't know, Bram. It's just something I would give some thought to. I
think it'd be, if this is a 1-score game in the 4th quarter, measuring the noise that I know is going to be there in the 1st quarter when they walk out there and because they're going to be so amped.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to get tight in there in the 4th quarter because by the time we get around to Saturday, because I agree with you. When I've talked to everybody, this has happened every week. I don't think people have really watched this team. They've only really seen the highlights. They know tangentially that Jaden's very good and ahead of the curve. But they look at it and they see the scores and they think there's some kind of luck attached to it. And by the time we get around to Saturday, I think they'll have informed themselves enough to realize there's kind of nothing lucky that's happened here. This team has been very poised. They execute down the stretch. They've been terrific with time management. And if you end up in a 1-score game with them, I wish you luck because I've seen this over and over and over. This guy is a stone cold killer. And if you give him a chance to beat you, I don't care who you are or where it is, he will.
Yeah. And I think that's where, and it's funny because I do think people are you're a fan, you're going to look at the rosters, say like, boy, look at this roster compared to that. Look who this team has in this team. But again, it's the intangibles that this group brings. And part of those intangibles there's a mental toughness. Like way back when they talked, when Dan Quinn was first hired and this coaching staff they just got here, they talked about an identity and creating an identity. I think they've definitely done that. This is the first team that's had an identity here in years.
Yeah.
But there's a toughness, there's a togetherness, there's a belief, and that's hard to beat. You might win, but it's hard to beat it.
I agree.
So I think that's where it's tricky trying to look at and analyze this game. But again, if Detroit's defense had all its guys, maybe I'd look at this game a little bit differently, but they don't. And, because you can make the case. Then I was talking to other people, like even John Jansen, former Redskin, now in Detroit, sportscaster there, or sports talk show host there. But he said, and I kind of agree, like Washington is a little bit where Detroit was a year or so ago.
Yes.
But, that team almost got to the Super Bowl. So, and they scared the heck out of San Francisco on the road. So I do think this team can do it. Whether or not they will, I don't know. But they have the right mindset. They have the right coach. I think one thing, too, that people have to understand, like, this team embraces the moment. And they embrace the situation. Like, they don't look ahead. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, they don't look ahead. And I know it's human nature to do that, but like Dan Quinn doesn't. It's like, today is Monday. This is what we're doing. That's all we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it filters down the late game situations. They embrace it. Like, I definitely think there's a part of them that enjoys it. And it's funny because, like, Dan Quinn's like, I love it. Jaden Daniels like, I live for this. Cliff Kingsbury's like, I hate it. So, but it's funny though, like, if you have guys who embrace that, it's pretty damn good, because there are guys who don't, and this team does. So that's, like I said, there's a lot of things with this group that is tough to define and tough to beat.
Yeah. All right. Last thing, and I agree. There's an easy comparison to make because I think both of these teams are kind of built the same way. They're going to be very tough. They have the same kind of mottos, like we'll fight anybody anywhere, or like we'll do all that stuff. I think there's a similar kind of mindset that Quinn and Campbell have kind of instilled. And because neither one has won in a long time, there's this easy, obvious comparison to make between them. And I agree that, like, they feel like they're 1 to 2 years behind where Detroit is right now, and maybe will become that, with an exception. This quarterback, no offense to Jared Goff, I think is terrific. He ain't this guy. And if Washington wins this game, I think they're less the Lions and more the Chiefs. Because if they can pull this off, can pull this off, watch out. Like, it may happen way sooner than on anybody's timeline. And frankly, the fact that they're here is already accelerated beyond anyone's timeline, but it's because they have a special player. We saw this when Pat Mahomes started playing immediately, and we're seeing it with this guy. If they pull this one off, I think everyone's expectations for what they're going to be in the near term are going to go through the moon.
And when I say like a year or so behind Detroit, it's more so like filling out the roster.
Yes.
But you're right. Like, they are so far ahead of not far ahead of Detroit, the quarterback position, but far ahead of the developmental process at that position, that it raises everything else. And it makes, they're making, like, Olamide Zaccheaus is a professional receiver, but he looks really good this year because of how Kingsbury's used him and how Jaden Daniels distributes the ball. De'Ami Brown has had his best year as a pro. Not a coincidence. Terry McLaurin, best year as a pro. 11 red zone touchdowns. And it's, again, it's how you're used, but it's also this kid, this Daniels finding him in those spots, knowing where to go with the ball in those spots. So, like, so that while they may not have the Jahmyr Gibbs or the Jameson Williams, to complement some of the other stuff, they have a lot of good parts. They have veterans in Wagner, Ertz, Eckler, who really they slowed Father Time, and they're big time contributors. But they're guys who know how Wagner, Ertz, like, those guys have won titles. They know how to win, and it's not just by, like, plays you make. It's the preparation throughout the week and how you lift others around you by doing that. Like, that's where it is, and like that's where some of the best moves last year were some of these under the radar. And it's not that those guys are big names, but, like, they were beyond their prime players. They've made a huge difference in many ways. And I think, like, that's where the growth has been accelerated. And, they were, again, the Detroit comparison, they were further ahead of Detroit in the first year of their programs, but they also have coaches who are really good at setting the tone for the building. And it's not about, X's and O's. It's about intentionality. It's about culture. And they've really, really done a good, and we heard a lot about culture the last few years. This is what culture is.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, that's where they're ahead of the game, like how quickly they turn all that around, which then, translates to the field, that you should not be surprised by anything they do on Saturday. If they win, you shouldn't be surprised. You just shouldn't. It'd be, I guess, a little surprised because Detroit's had such a good year, but you can't put anything past this group. And if they lose, like, okay, this is the start of it.
Agreed. Thank you so much. I'll see you up in Michigan this weekend, and look forward to sharing our thoughts next week, however this thing plays out. Thank you, John.
Very good, Bram. Thanks.
All right, welcome back. One more thing on the game, like this weekend. So Tom Brady's calling it with Kevin Burkhardt. He's a part owner in Vegas. They want to hire Ben Johnson. That's at least what the reporting would suggest at this point. Here's what I would say to all the people who are, calling this out as that's a little ridiculous that the color analyst of a big high leverage playoff game has invested his time, energy, and hopes in getting one of these coaches to be his next head coach. I agree that that's ridiculous. However, I think most viewers don't care. And unless he's like going to be just waxing poetic about Ben Johnson the whole time, I actually think it will be revealing to him more than anything. The question will be, is if Washington has success on defense, would he be overly critical about him? I think that's the question I think that most football fans would ask at this point. But I think the most casual viewers that aren't in the bubble that we're in will not care and don't care personally.
No, I agree. And I know they've even said, Brady won't get the same access that everyone has for some of these games. But at the same time, do you not think owners, GMs, whoever are doing all these interviews are getting that same information from everyone else? I'm kind of with you. Is Ben Johnson keeping secrets until he's getting into some of these meetings? No. So I honestly think the resume is literally out there. I'm not putting much stock into it. I think what this is, it's a little Brady Patriots Stockholm syndrome of everyone's they're cheating. He's going to figure out a way to game the system. Ben Johnson's a top head coaching candidate. Period. What extra information is he going to get or not going to get doing this? I don't know, and I don't really care.
I would be worried the other way around. What's Brady telling him about our defense?
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually,
that'd be more the thing I'm concerned about than him sitting there talking about how great Ben Johnson is because he's trying to woo him to take that job. Honestly,
100%, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, last thing. Caps Sens tonight. Every time we talk about this game, I always just assume that they're going to win. It's this 5 years running of, I just assume they're going to beat them. And so I'll just stick with that. I assume they're going to beat them tonight.
Yeah. Once again, the storyline to follow here is Logan Thompson's going to get the second start in a row. I think it's the first time that's happened all year long that's been planned to have a goalie start for 2 games in a row. So all he did at the beginning of this little IR stint for Charlie Lindgren was get a shutout against the Ducks. I expect LT to play really well tonight. Also, hottest hand with the Caps is Ethan Frank right now. So I don't know if you're of the betting type, go look at what his over-under on points is or anytime goal scoring. I would definitely look into that for tonight. But I'm with you. Caps Ottawa, usually a dub for the Caps. Win. I don't know what the score is going to be, but I know they'll probably win this one.
LT, huh? Is that
Oh, you never have I not used that on
thing? LT?
Yeah, LT.
LaDainian Tomlinson, Lawrence Taylor, Logan Thompson. How about that?
By the way, you want to talk about a deal? Logan Thompson gets paid under $1 million. So they have a steal this year on their starting goaltender. They want to re-sign him. That's going to change. So
all right, everybody. We'll do the final full preview tomorrow. Bram wants to show ESPN 630 the Sports Capital.